right.
All right, here you go.
Best Halloween costume Rob ever did.
I'm gonna have to pull that out, I think, for this. I'm gonna have to show that at some point.
Life is a journey, a road, if you will, where you have to drive straight through the winters that you face. Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey, the actor. But so many good stories in part one and part two as we start our Painted Porch Strategies book club this month. Not one we necessarily thought we would do, right? But there are so many stoic lessons in this book. And I don't even know if Matthew McConaughey realizes how much stoicism he touches on. But I want to ask you right away, in this book, it's really a memoir filled with stories, at least so far in part one and two, of Matthew McConaughey growing up before he was an actor, when he decides he's going to go to film school instead of becoming a lawyer. And his dad's response to that is that what you want to do? Don't half-ass it. And you get this sense that McConaughey did not, right? That he played full out. And there are so many different stories that he touches on here. So Sierra, I should introduce everybody.
Yeah.
That's Sierra Ram Cantrell right there.
Hi.
She is our Chief Joy Officer, our Mindfulness Sherpa. This is Amy Yakowski, the founder and CEO of Painted Porch Strategies, which is Chief Evolution Officer in this case. I'm Rob Hunter. I'm the MC here at Painted Porch Strategies, the Master of Communication. So stories that stood out to you, like what sense of Matthew McConaughey did you get right away in parts one and two, Sierra?
Well, I was actually really surprised because I was kind of expecting Matthew McConaughey to have this very like chill upbringing and this very just like, yeah, go with the flow kind of family. And a lot of these stories, that is not at all what his family was like. I was fascinated by the fact that he had both a biological brother and an adopted brother. And I was also like, I was a little shocked when he was talking about the type of relationship his parents had with each other. They had like a fire on fire relationship. I was like, whoa. So I was really surprised.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agreed. I mean, the fact that he talks about his parents and he said they were divorced 3 times and married twice, all to each other. That tells you right there the type of relationship. But it's interesting, going back to what you said, Rob, through all of this, he is able to find the pearl in the oyster, like you like to talk about, Sierra, in your program, Radical Mindfulness. To the outside person, you know, reading this, you go, oh my gosh, these people are kind of nuts. I mean, I feel like they have a couple screws loose. They don't, this is not a healthy family relationship. But at the same time, he says, we loved and we loved big. We loved, you know, broad. Sometimes it didn't necessarily come out in the right way, but at the end of the day, we all knew that we were loved, and we learned, you know, through those moments of strife, we learned something. That was the most important thing. What did we learn in this moment? And he even talks about that, like sometimes, you know, getting in trouble, getting disciplined by his parents, you know, and he's like, you know, I can't remember if he said specifically. I think he said he got a whooping a couple times. You know, he is from Texas. It's the way of that world. But he's like, I got a whooping, but then we immediately went out to dinner, had pizza, or went to get ice cream, because it was more about that happened. This was the resulting action from it because of your choice. And now we're going to celebrate the fact that you learned a lesson from this and you're not going to do it again. So I thought that was really interesting. You know, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a very tenuous relationship. But at the same time, he sees it as nothing but love.
Well, and it's normal. It was normal for him. And this is where the Stoic lesson of judgment comes in, and how natural it is to judge, because you are reading the story. Matthew McConaughey in Greenlights tells a story of how his parents got in a huge fight. Like the mother pulled a knife out on the dad and had it at his throat, and they yelled at each other, and he threw ketchup at her. And you're picturing this scene that normally could lead to an arrest, but it didn't get that far. So he sets that story up with, that was the way my life was. Whatever your judgment about it is, your feeling about it is completely irrelevant, because it only matters to me. And that's that stoicism that McConaughey touches on, is that it is about really the one rule of life that they were so consistent on, is the dichotomy of control. Mm-hmm. What can you control? Your reaction, your thoughts, your emotions to events, right? The events are the events. Judge them how you want, but it only matters how you deal with it. So that's what he touches on here. And I love that he also took off to Australia as an exchange student at 18 years old, because how he gets into that in part 2 is, I was forced into winter, forced to look inside myself because I didn't have anyone else. And I think that that is such an important lesson that we all need to do. We all need to drive into winter, into the blizzard, into the snowstorm that McConaughey did, because he was living with this very odd family in Australia who insisted that Matthew call them mom and dad. And he was like, no, I already have a mom and dad. I'm good. And it created this tension because their beliefs were just incongruent. So he ended up leaving that house, going to another one. But during that year away, where he didn't have the safety net of his mom or his dad or his brothers, he learned a ton about himself. And I just so related to that, because during the pandemic, especially the early on, like the first year and a half of it, there was a lot of isolation for me, which I had not ever really been used to. But I found that I really liked it. Mm-hmm. So much so that now I'm somewhat introverted.
Never thought that would happen.
Yeah, I know. Exactly right. But I just love that idea, that message that if the storm is coming, go through the storm. Don't avoid it. Don't drive around it. Just face the headwinds head on and challenge yourself and see what you're made of. And I think that is probably that time in Australia what sets up the rest of Matthew McConaughey's life.
Yeah. Well, he talks about, right at the beginning, getting relative with the inevitable. And that's what he considers his green lights. And it's all about that perspective, the perspective of the situation. How do you, as one of the big Stoic things, the dichotomy of control, it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it. It's how you respond to it that matters. That's what defines the moment. That's what defines the meaning behind it. And that's very much the theme of the stories that he's told so far. And he doesn't even call this a memoir. He calls this his playbook or an approach book. He's like, this is not just me reflecting on my life. This is me reflecting on core lessons that I've learned, moments of real shit. And he says that moments of shit that he finds that he can create, a beautiful truffle out of, finding those green lights, finding those opportunities out of the sludge, and where you can grow from it.
Well, I also really love that in the beginning, he talks about how he loves bumper stickers. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how it's like a quick one-liner, and, it can be pithy, it can be in your face, it can be all these things, but he's like, but it's how you take it. And guess what? Even if you don't like it, like, it's a bumper sticker, it's going to be gone in a minute anyway. So I felt like there was very much a Stoic approach to when he was talking about his love of bumper stickers. Because again, if it's just a short statement, often there's hundreds, if not thousands, of ways you could perceive that statement or what that says potentially about the person whose car it's on. So he's talking to us about perceptions, and how you perceive is your choice.
And I love that, Sierra, because it's really, there's so much in life about that, right? Imagine a bumper sticker as something that doesn't go your way in a moment. It just becomes a bumper sticker because now that moment is gone. And it's what you do with that and what holds you back as, Matthew McConaughey's journey through these green lights. And going to Australia as an exchange student, right? That was a big green light. That was a big risk for an 18-year-old to take, to move to another country. And I love how he describes, as he arrives, they land at the Sydney airport, which Sydney is like a metropolitan world-class city. And he's with the family. And they say, oh, we live on the outskirts of the city. So he drives through Sydney. They're an hour outside. Oh, must be here. Nope. We're going to keep going. So he ends up like 4 hours away from Sydney in this really middle of nowhere experience, which, again, he had expectations only to have them change in the moment, and having to deal with that and adjust, but staying with it, right? He never threw the white flag up and moved home. He knew he had to see it through, so he saw it through.
Well, and I thought that was an interesting part too. It goes back to what he talked about in part 1 with outlaw logic. Whether you were breaking the law or not, be very clear about why you're doing it. They broke the law a lot, apparently, in his family.
Lost somewhat of suggestions in rural parts of Texas.
There's a lot of gray area in his life, but the way he talks about it is like, listen, I love he even talked about the difference between a bullshitter and a liar. He's like, there's a difference. A bullshitter knows what he's doing. And, he's very obvious about it. So actually, I respect a bullshitter more than a liar, because a liar thinks he's getting away with it. And it's that idea that when it comes to the way he approaches commitment, his parents are like, listen, if you're going to commit to dine and dash, you got to own up to it if you're going to dine and dash, right? It's that idea. But with this, when he went to sign up or finalize his paperwork, if you will, for the exchange program, they had asked him to sign a statement saying that he would stay there for a year. That's a red light. That's like a yellow light. That's why would they have me do that? And they sort of danced around and explained it. But he said, I'm not going to sign this, but I will shake on it. And I thought that was really interesting that he chose not to sign. And I'm curious if we get into that a little bit more, but maybe that had to do with outlaw logic and, signing contracts and getting stuck in a contract, but still honoring the gentleman's agreement, honoring your word. And so even though when he was in Australia and he encountered this really troublesome environment that he was in, he committed. He could have, because he didn't sign the paperwork. He could have said, I'm out of here. I'm going, I'm done. I'm going back home. But he didn't. He stuck it out because he made that commitment. Yeah.
So as we progress in parts 1 and 2, what do you get out of this memoir approach that you can apply to your life? Sierra, I'll start that question with you.
Ooh.
Because, some memoirs are for that, some aren't, right? Some might not be in our lane, but sometimes there's little pebbles that you can pick up and go, I'm going to put that in my pocket.
Yeah. One of the things that I found interesting was I like how when he talks about how he starts writing and journaling, that he didn't really understand why he was doing it. I liked how he just sort of said that it felt good to write, and he felt like he could figure things out when he was writing, even if it was just for himself. And I liked the way that, as he talked about how he didn't understand the full purpose of it yet. And I think that one of the final purposes was A, shaping the person that he would become, but B, using it in this book that he published. It's that at a time, if something you don't understand the full purpose, but it just feels right to you, to listen to that and not question the purpose too much, but to follow that spark or to follow that instinct that you might have.
Yeah. I think for me, I think mine is similar to yours, Sierra, but it's more along the lines of being willing to sit with yourself, to understand and to find the perspective and the lesson in the moment. He talks a lot about sometimes things appear as yellow or red lights. But if you take the time and you actually understand and what path you're going down, and you can anticipate, number one, that you're going to encounter red lights, but what can those red lights serve as? They can serve as those moments to sit, like literally, if you're sitting at a red light, you're sitting, you're waiting, you're pausing, you're resetting, and you're gaining some new perspective. And through that, a lot of those red lights can actually turn into a green light or an opportunity, a new path on your journey that you hadn't otherwise anticipated. So I think that's the big thing, is that we so often tend to focus on the things that are going wrong in our life, or the things that didn't go the way we wanted them to. And often, if we really sit down and think about it and look at it, sometimes those things that didn't go our way were actually the biggest blessings that we've had in our life, or the biggest lessons that we've learned in our lives, that had it all been sunshine and beaches, like in green lights. Yeah, had it all been green lights, we wouldn't actually have enjoyed the journey because we would have just kept going, right? We wouldn't have had those moments to pause and reflect.
We have nothing to compare, right?
Yeah.
If there's no bad times, you don't know what a good time is because you never had a bad time. So everything can't be good. It's just, it's not the way life goes. And I think that's the lesson is really figure out, and it doesn't matter what age you are. I mean, if you're watching this and you're 55, you got so many years left ahead of you that if you have not been living in congruency with what your spirit wants, now's as good a time as any. Because I think that where Matthew McConaughey had the advantage is starting early, right? And where I had the advantage going to broadcasting school because that's what I wanted to do. Like I knew that was where my path was. So not a lot of people have that opportunity to do that. So starting early helps, but it's all based on how you self-reflect, right? And that's the lesson in that tricky situation of being an Australian exchange student with an odd family, which you can definitely read more about in Greenlights, that propelled him forward because he had a low period of no choice but to figure himself out. Some of us don't do that till later. I mentioned I did it during the pandemic, and that was like, I oddly had a decent time during the pandemic because I got to spend time with myself, something that I think so many people are afraid of. It doesn't sound like Matthew McConaughey was ever afraid to spend time with himself because he spent an entire summer building a tree fort by himself that was like 130 feet in the air.
Stealing the wood piece by piece.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that he stole.
Outlaw Logic.
Again, that Outlaw Logic.
Outlaw Logic.
Yep. Okay, so quickly, do you have any final thoughts with parts 1 and 2 in Greenlights before we preview parts 3 and 4?
Well, I love that I'm surprised by this because it just goes to prove the whole, like, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't think you understand somebody until you really listen to their history. So I love when that happens. I love when I'm like pleasantly surprised. So I can't wait to hear what's next in Greenlights.
Amy?
I agree. Yeah, right on. That was one of the things that drew me to this was I knew it wasn't your typical biography of here's all the things that went well in my life, or there's some real shit that he had to step in and step through and navigate around. And I think that we're going to continue to learn from him. I think there was one thing that I wrote down that I do want to call out just at the end. In part 2, the find your frequency. One of the big things he was talking about how to find his frequency, turn those dials, adjust it, and really find out who he is and what he really believes and what he values as a person. And it makes me think of the analogy of, like literally a radio, that sometimes you have to have your buttons pushed in order to find the right frequency for you to help you calibrate and get in line and aligned with what you believe, what you want, what you'll stand up for, and what you'll allow to pass by.
And I think that's a perfect way to leave it right there. So your homework is to find your frequency, tune into it. And if you have any more questions, let us know. We're Painted Porch Strategies. What we do is we advise people and companies on 3 key strategic areas: skills, mindfulness, mindset involved in that, communication, because how you interact with people and how you interact with yourself is incredibly important, to teamwork, our third element in Painted Porch Strategies, which is why we're talking about Greenlights, part 1 and 2. So go find your frequency. Part 3 and 4, we're going to get more into Matthew McConaughey finding his frequency and how that helped him flow through life. So here's to flowing through life. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah.